Thank you for coming out. I want to thank Principal Span and Carl Maxwell and Kevin Nesbitt for 197 for allowing us to use the facility. As it turns out, all the members of the board, Glenn and Kenny's the one who organized it. Please come around. We all actually attended this school at one point in time, so as Glenn was saying, this place seemed a lot bigger when we were here, you know, now that it's either way. So let's get started. Thank you for coming out. I think it's appropriate that this 100th anniversary we make sure that there's a piece that I read the other day that said, hopefully we don't get historical amnesia. Okay, so let's get started. The first person I'd like to introduce is someone who I worked with, and I was on a panel with him at the Maisels studio some time ago. He's done a great deal of work. He's very well known in the documentary field. Done a lot of work with the protecting this African burial ground. But I'll let him talk to you a little about it. He's going to introduce a trailer that he put together. So I'd like to introduce Tait Jr., ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Len. Thanks for coming, folks. Glad to be here. I'm happy to be sharing the panel with David Lewis, one of my all-time heroes. And he and I were just sharing some reminiscences about two of my documentary filmmaker heroes, Bill Miles and Bill Graves. And those were the people whose work that I admired growing up and who I wanted to grow up to be. And I've tried my best to do that. So this trailer is actually a 5-minute promo reel for a piece we did when they discovered the African burial ground in Lower Manhattan. The film's actually called "And I'll Be Free to Travel Home." I got the great Lena Horne to be our on-camera talent. And she drafted her daughter, Gail, to be the actual narrator of the film. So it became an actual family thing. And at the conclusion of the production, before we wrapped the script, she said to me, you know, one of my ancestors actually fought with the Massachusetts 54th. And I went, that's serendipitously perfect. It meant you were supposed to do this documentary. So this trailer gives you a little bit about who those Africans were in colonial New York. And I wanted that setting so that you have an understanding of how long and deep our presence has been in North America and in this region. The Africans actually built Harlem in 1658, but that's another story for another time. Go ahead, Rose.
Hello and welcome. I'm Lena Horne. Thank you for joining us on this fascinating journey. It's an exploration of times and places in American history from a perspective that's little known and seldom shown. Along the way, you'll meet some truly astonishing people, many of whose ancestors were buried almost 30 feet down in the heart of New York's federal complex in Lower Manhattan. Discovery of that over 300-year-old African burial ground, the impact it's had, and what it really means to the history of this country is what this program is all about.
I told you in the beginning, it looked like everything that was said in the beginning, it looked like everybody's going to be in that draft in that burial ground, but Africans, my ancestors, our ancestors. And it hurts when I see people have to grovel to get their thing over. You know what I mean? It's sad.
What could trigger such emotion? What could make this elderly woman weep these tears in such a public place?
I pray the Lord, my soul
fate of these early African ancestors, the question of what's to become of them and their ancient African burial ground, whether this hallowed ground where they were found will truly be their final resting place. Who were they? How many free? How many slave? How were they laid out and why? And why are so many early African Americans buried in such a prime section of Lower Manhattan?
Black culture in Manhattan, or black history in Manhattan, begins at the tip of the island.
By 1644, Gracia Angola, Manuel de Rus, Peter Santomé, and the others had managed to gain ownership of lands they had already been farming, had petitioned and won partial freedom, and had time to work their own land when they weren't needed by the Dutch West India Company. Because family and community ties were so close, we can safely assume that those early African burials took place in an area near those families. Thus, this over 326-year-old burial ground evolved right where they lived and worked. Armed as best they could with hoes, knives, guns, swords, and axes, they set fire to a nearby outhouse and launched their desperate revolt. 13 blacks, free and enslaved, were burned at the stake. 18 were hanged, including Margaret Carey's lover, and 71 slaves were transported out of the colony. It is believed the executions all took place near the African burial ground, and that many of those put to death were buried there.
I am not going to be a party of your disrespecting what people here have testified, scholars have called, the most important archaeological discovery in this century. And with that having been said,
I will rise up then to greet my Maker. Raise up to greet my Maker, for I am free to travel home. Yes, I am free to travel home. My soul is free to travel home.
Okay, so now we're going to start what we came here for. We get this wonderful piece by Bill Bonds called Men of Bronze, about these black heroes as they return from World War I.
We'll go all the way up there with you. Where can we walk? We're going to march inside. Right here? That's all right? Yeah, that's good. Christ, they're going to take more.
New York City. Soldiers of the 369th New York National Guard parade up Fifth Avenue. Many of these men are the sons and grandsons of the old New York 15th Infantry, the Harlem Hellfighters, who became famous in France as the 369th, the old Rattlesnake Regiment. A veteran of World War I remembers how he and 2,000 others volunteered to join this regiment. The first black American combat troops to fight on French soil. He also remembers how his regiment marched up Fifth Avenue while thousands of New Yorkers cheered. But that was a long time ago.
Ken, shout out again for the idea for doing this project. Ken started there. And real briefly, this building holds a certain amount of memory for myself, Glenn, two Glens. Glenn, okay, please, Glenn, relax, and I'm one of my board members, because we went to this school as children. So it means a great deal to have us coming back now. So we're going to try to do this having really learned gentlemen and asking them to make comments of, a short duration is really not right, but the time is not out. So we're saying maybe a few comments in the beginning, like we talked about, gentlemen, and then we'll open it up for some questions after that. Now, what Glenn wants me to do is if you have questions, raise your hand while you're here now. He'll hand you a card, you can write it down. He'll help us to expedite the question part, okay? We're going to have Dr. Lewis go first, and I'm going to say a brief thing, a few brief comments about Dr. David Leonard Lewis. He is the author of 9 books and editor of 2 additional books. Dr. Lewis concentrates on comparative history with a special focus on 20th century United States social history and civil rights. He is twice winner, that's 2 times, of the Pulitzer Prize for biography or biography. For part 1 and part 2 of the biography of W.E.B. Du Bois. When Harlem was in vogue and the portable Harlem Renaissance reader provide a panoply of exhaustively researched essays and are critical to an understanding of what is perhaps the world's most celebrated neighborhood. I'm going to say that again, the world's most celebrated neighborhood. In 2003, Dr. Lewis was appointed and currently serves as the Julius Silver University Professor and Professor of History at New York University, which my dad was an alma mater of, so I take some of that too. Dr. Lewis, your comments, please.
Thank you very much. I think we're all collecting our emotions out there. Remarkable documentary. It's amazing that so much of that footage could be retrieved. It is quite poignant to put ourselves back just 100 years ago this February, 1919, when those men returned, the 15th or the 369th, up Fifth Avenue, past all of New York. It was not an official holiday, but everybody took it as a holiday. Someone said, I think, quoted in the New York Times, I'm taking off. I'm not going to work today. I have to see these guys. I can get another job, but I can't see this march past again. It certainly was extraordinary. And when it reaches Harlem, of course, you would very much have liked to have been with those men for the interaction, the celebration, and the merriment, and at the same time, the significance of it. And it was truly significant because those men were bringing to this country a new view of race and valor and civil rights. And it was immediately apparent that we were in an era now of the new Negro. These people had gone off to fight for their country, to make the world safe for a democracy that they did not have in their own country. Let's remember that Woodrow Wilson was the president, and Woodrow Wilson wrote his vision for the world to come after the war, the guns fell silent, is a grand vision of a League of Nations and of peace and of human rights. But before those men went off to fight, there was another march down Fifth Avenue I'd like to recall. And that was a march in which James Weldon Johnson, W.E.B. Du Bois, and the leadership of the NAACP led about 10,000 African Americans, the children and the women in white, and the men in their black suits, in the great silent march from Harlem to the foot of Fifth Avenue, with pennants and placards saying, "Make the world safe for democracy by making the world, making democracy here. Begin." And another really quite stunning pennant which said, "Your hands have blood on them," accusing Woodrow Wilson of and reprimanding and reproaching him for his silence. Lynching did not stop. Indeed, lynching accelerated on the eve of the war, our declaration of commitment, and in East St. Louis, a terrible race riot occurred as well. So that's a bit of the backdrop of these men who are going to give their all to make America, the world better, and democracy a reality. And so they return, and a new history begins. Soon we're going to have a renaissance, we will call it, a Harlem Renaissance, with all the aspiration and the commitment to making a democracy a reality. And, well, to go back though to the actual presence in France, our presence there was in a sense an accident. When the battle was resolved that there would be a camp to train African American officers to lead the men who would be drawn to the colors, the 200,000 of them. When that battle was resolved, a camp was established in Des Moines, Iowa, for the training of those officers. And they were splendid in their preparation, but there was an issue. Where are they going to go? What units are they going to command? Happily, there were already National Guard units, and those National Guard units would have men of color commanding. This was the case of the 370. The 370th was the Illinois National Guard, and its commander was a Colonel Dennison, who was a magnificent officer of much experience. The 373rd had no men of color commanding it, and the 369th had only, as a person of color, its grand unit, its grand band commanded by James Reese Jim Europe. So that already portended some concerns. And when the officers who were trained in Camp Des Moines were sent various places, Spartanburg, we saw, South Carolina, the reaction, response was the general staff found itself in a dilemma. And the solution was to send the 369th and the two National Guard units, the two other National Guard units, to France, where the French desperately called for American troops. And so they arrived before the other units and are immediately absorbed by the French units. And it is that good fortune, which was in a sense a misfortune, that the 369th will be there 191 days in the trenches under fire, with the first Poilier bestowed on Needham and Johnson, and then finally, gloriously, to fast forward, to lead the French army into the occupied territory that the Germans had held during the combat, to lead the French to recover their own territory. Black troops leading the French army and receiving, as they do, a unit Poilier. Every man in the unit returned home with these high decorations. You would have thought that the War Department, our own, would have wanted our presence to be acknowledged. However, on the Arc de Triomphe, which has the evidence of all of the participants in the Allied forces, Senegalese, Vietnamese, Moroccans, Tunisians, and so on, we are not there. There is no evidence on the Arc de Triomphe that we fought, that we were directed, that we were decorated. The United States military, Wilson's Defense Department, insisted that there be no such acknowledgement. And so we did not march down the Champs-Élysées with the others. That decision was made by a racist government. Also, I don't want to depress us all, because this is a fight that was well worth fighting. There was the military communique sent to all French commanded forces, saying that the United States Defense Department would wish that these men not be allowed to fraternize with the French, and especially that French officers should not salute African American officers. That the sensitivity there was quite profound, because of course after the war was over, these men would return to attitudes in Mississippi, in Virginia, indeed in Ohio perhaps, that were inappropriate. Mr. W.E.B. Du Bois on an inspection tour, who unearthed that communique. It was highly published. There was great embarrassment, and perhaps a lesson was learned, but it was an aspect that was difficult, balancing that all the parties were making. Us determined to spend our lives in order to advance democracy. Powerful forces determined not to allow the recognition and the civil rights implication of that being acknowledged. And finally, I'd like to just mention one other aspect of this. The highest decorated African American officer was Colonel Charles Young, a West Pointer. And as the war, as we edged into our commitment into the war, his presence would have meant that he would have commanded the 93rd Division. And in order order to prevent that from happening, Colonel Gunn, who had fought in Mexico and almost captured Pancho Villa, who had received a battlefield promotion to Lieutenant Colonel, would, by the hierarchy of the Army, have been the only officer who could have commanded the 92nd. Unfortunately, he was sent to Leonard General Hospital in San Francisco for a medical examination, which determined that this robust cavalry officer, West Pointer, whose record had been spotless, had Bright's disease, high blood pressure. And of course, we wouldn't want the colonel with high blood pressure as a general to be incapacitated by the disease. And so he was promoted to brigadier general and then retired. And so the 93rd did not have the officer it should have had. Nonetheless, the 93rd returned, covered with decorations. In the last major campaign, it pierced barricades and the barbed wire and was triumphant. And so, life, history, civil rights, and race are a mixed bag. And as we contemplate this anniversary, this centenary, I think we need to think about the wonderful flowers and also the different. Thank you.
Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, thank you very much. Colonel Young, high blood pressure. All black men got high blood pressure. That doesn't stop us from being great. Nope. I digress. All right. Our second panelist is Mr. Eric Tait. Mr. Eric Tait is a media consultant, founder of EVT Productions and EVT Educational Products Incorporated. He is a veteran broadcast journalist and documentarian. How about a round of applause for that show? And please don't forget to pick up the flyers that he brought. They're at the table in the back. It looks very exciting. His credits include ABC World News Tonight, Nightline 2020, Entertainment Tonight, and ABC's Our World documentary series. He's executive producer, director of the award-winning radio documentary Every Voice Can Sing, and the multiple award-winning Then I'll Be Free to Travel Home radio and television documentary series. Among his other award-winning documentaries, the following have aired on PBS: Across the River with Hendrick Smith and The Legacy of Maggie's American Dream, as well as Fire in Their Eyes. Among his many awards in the New York Association of Black Journalists, Lifetime Achievement Award in Broadcasting. Mr. Tait, please, your comments.
Thank you very much. It's indeed an honor and pleasure to be with you. The legacy of the 369th, which we're here to honor, means significant because I spent time in the U.S. military, United States Air Force, regularly. And actually one of the stations that I found myself was Donaldson Air Force Base back in the early 60s. And the town that Donaldson Air Force Base was located adjacent to the Spartanburg, South Carolina. So you understand the legacy of Spartanburg. It didn't change by the early 60s. And so black commissioned officers still had problems negotiating local interactions. When I was going through navigation training in Waco, Texas, they still had segregated facilities. And so we would be 1969 when I got out, it was still the same kind of struggle. But to bring it home to the men of bronze and the 369, there was another piece of military documentation that the American Expeditionary Forces put out while those men were in France. And it was a special pamphlet that they put out calling attention to the quote, background information on the American colored troops. In the context of that panel, basically warning the French population and the French military about the quote, inferiority and the quote, greatest tendencies of these black military men of the 369. Now this panel was not put out by the German enemy. The pamphlet was put out by the American Expeditionary Forces, people of the government of the United States that these men were fighting. So you understand that they were battling serious, we're talking about double B, or victory at home, victory overseas, within the context of the Woodrow Wilson presidency. You have to understand that when these men volunteered to go sign up and fight for democracy back in 1914, 1913, Woodrow Wilson was the president of the United States that D.W. Griffith quoted at least 3 times in Birth of a Nation. Okay? And this paean to the KKK was the very first film ever screened at the White House. And it was screened at the White House at the behest of Woodrow Wilson. So this is the backdrop, and this is what these young men, I really love the main narrator, Bill Hughes, the 16-and-a-half-year-old who got his age pushed up to 19 and went off to fight and came back totally unscathed and did not lose his sense of self. I mean, that man is the epitome of the 369 and of those black men who went off to fight for this country. I mean, I just love watching him and listening to him because he knew. He thought he was back into the film. Yeah, I was not going back into that art because when I grew up, I would do all kinds of stuff, but I never had that stuff hit me in the face until I went into the military. And so, seeing it up close, firsthand, I can speak to seeing it up close, firsthand myself. He said, I'm not going back there. And then what happens? It hits again, and what does he do? He goes back. Now, I'm laughing because the promo that I showed earlier, the 4 minute promos, that promo in the historical part that we tell in that documentary series, If You Travel, we talk about the fact that African descent people have always fought to preserve home, art, and country because they've always understood that it is their country. They paid for it with their wealth, their ancestral wealth. A lot of folks died to make this country what it is. So they have no problem going on. They fought with the Dutch against the Native Americans in going. They fought with the Patriots in the Revolutionary War. But guess what? War that fought with the British because the British promised them their freedom and the Patriots didn't. That's right. You have to understand, we do fight for ourselves and our own cause and our own freedom. We understand the game we're in this country. We have always understood. War of 1812 fought then. The concluding segment of part 1 of the I'll be free to travel home is the charge on the Fort Wagner off the South Carolina coast by the men of the 54th Massachusetts. And they were fighting to preserve the Union and get rid of slavery. They weren't asking white men to go fight for their freedom. They were fighting for their own freedom. World War I, we have the men in bronze. The Korean War, my uncle fought in the Korean War. Vietnam, I'm sure there are people in this room, one or two, may have been there. I was there. We've always fought for this country. The men of the 369th are a prime example of who we are as fighting men who are fighting not just for this country, but for their people. And I'm very glad that Bill did that bronze, and I'm very glad that I got to know him as a friend and mentor, and I'm glad you were all here to see that film. Thank you.
We have a special guest, the good Congressman just walked in.
The city of Korean War. Yes, indeed. I joined the Army when I was 18 years old. But I was one of the smartest kids the Linus had. When for Lewis Washington in 1950, they told me there was a police action in Korea. So I said, why not? I had no idea those fools were fighting and killing each other. And I found myself in Korea, surrounded by tens of thousands of Chinese, wounded, left for dead, and wondering, why in the world am I in Korea? I didn't even know where Korea was. But I survived. I came back home, and I was a hero in the Army. But back in the Garment Center, I was still a high school dropout. And they put me pushing this hand truck back there, and I was a sergeant when I left, and I thought a lot of myself, you know. And one of those hand trucks got loose, and it was raining, and it slipped out of my hand, and boxes went all over 36th Street and 6th Avenue. And this white cop cussed me out. I told him to pick up these boxes because I was tying up traffic. I looked at him, and I looked at those boxes. And I went from 36th Street to 23rd Street and 7th Avenue to the Veterans Administration, and I never looked back. They gave me a test, an aptitude test, and I took my rosaries and prayer books, and took the test, and they concluded that I'd make a good mortician or a good electrician. Well, I knew they were racist, and I didn't know. that bad. I cussed them all out. You know, by this time, I'm 22 years old and shot up and can't do anything. When I went to get a job, he said, what can you do? I said, I can dismantle that 1.5 rifle, put it back together. I can give orders for 1.55mm howitzer, 25-pound projectile. I can attack and land projectiles on the enemy 7 miles away. I said, what else you can do? I said, that's what I do. Well, by the time when I got finished with them, they explained I didn't have as much time to do what I wanted to do. But the funny thing is that I had no idea what the hell I wanted to do. All I knew is that I had to do better than I was doing. But my grandfather, I was living with him. He was an elevator operator in the criminal court building. I wanted so hard to please that old man, but he had a hard time with my father and my mother, and he took it out on me. He loved me, but he found it very difficult coming from Accomack, Virginia, to be too nice publicly. But I thought I said, he went to work every day in the criminal court building, and he was able to take up the district attorneys, the judges, and the lawyers. That's all he told me about. So when I went home and told him I was going to be a lawyer, he never stopped laughing. I didn't know what the hell else to say, because something good to me if he had worked in a hospital. I said, I want to be a doctor. But it worked out. I'm telling you, God is good.
Right, all the time.
Harlem felt sorry for me, and wherever I went, as he leave the boy alone, he's trying to go back to school. I worked in a Hotel Teresa for 3 years while I was going to school, and they treated me like I was somebody. Those pimps and hustlers wouldn't let anybody bother when I was studying. And the young girls didn't treat me too bad either. So. But I came here today because when Glenn told me that community people wanted to play honor to our African American heroes, I said, count me in. I said, count me in. Because we are very, very, very unusual American. Unusual American. Most of you know that when I was in the Congress, I could say any damn thing about racism that existed in the very birth of this nation. No dare say anything. Dare doesn't mean I go to the Bronx. I was just scared. I was upstairs. None should call me a communist. He would call me a communist. But this nation is born in a racism that the world has never known. No country has ever taken over land occupied by Native Americans and deliberately killed them like we did. And then on top of that, no country has gone to another continent and taken human beings and not only use them as chattels, but to train them to be dehumanized so that you almost believe then that you're inferior because they've taken away your name, your songs, and your culture. And on top of that, no people in the United States of America have been more dedicated and more courageous in defending the flag than we have from the beginning of the Constitution, the Civil War, and every war that we've had. We have not only heroically fought, but we have excelled. So, when you honor the great 69, I had a crazy uncle. He became elderly operator, but he been clear over the years. And he was Marcus Garvey, and he took me on 25th Street, listening to what I didn't know they were talking about. But he campaigned up and down Lenox Avenue for the right to fight in World War I. He was 17 years old. And he was too young to take him, besides he was crazy. But it was Harlem and New York blacks that wanted to show to this country that they were just as good as anybody else in fighting anybody that was going to take away our country. The same thing happened in World War II. They refused to allow my brother, and he wasn't ready to go to Europe, but they had him in the entertainment unit. And his black unit was fighting to fight overseas. And so traditionally, no matter how much we complain, and we should, no matter how much we fight the injustice, and we should, nobody can ever accuse us of being the most patriotic Americans that they are, because we ain't going back nowhere. We ain't got no place to go. And we have invested too much in this country. And so, you guys are really special coming out on this Saturday to pay tribute to people who are gone and forgotten. That's the tragedy. They fought and they're forgotten. And so more and more is expected of us whenever we get the opportunity. If you just see some GI, say thank you for your service. If you see some old man, I quit going to my local doctor. I go to the Veterans Administration on 23rd Street, and all those veterans.
Thank you for your service. It means something that is not appreciated. And when people say, but don't we deserve better than someone like what we got into trouble? My mother was a very, very religious woman, and she used to try to convince me that God wouldn't put too much on us that we couldn't bear, and also that it's all going to work out at the end. Well, I don't believe in all of that, but I tell you what I do believe. When we got Obama as our president, there were colored folks walking all up and down, and they said, oh Jesus, I never thought I'd ever want to see black man as president. Thank God it's all over. It wasn't all over then, it ain't all over now. And we got Trump to remind us, those people just slid on the slimy rocks. The Ku Klux Klan just took off their robes temporarily. And the racism that existed from the very beginning, we still have to overcome. And so long as we do that, but Trump is just a reminder of how much we have to fight back. And how important it is to vote. When you elected me to go to the Congress in 1971, we formed the Congressional Black Caucus, and guess how many members of Congress we had in the House of Representatives? Guess, give me a number. Any? One. Give me a number. One. 5. More than that.
One. No, more than 5. There were 13 others. And then there were 20. And then there became 35. And as a result of getting out there, people fighting and dying for the right to vote, we have 55 African Americans in the House of Representatives. So don't say you're going to survive. So we got a long way to go. You bet your life. Have we come a long way? Yes. Thank you for coming out today. Keep the faith and never forget, we paid our dues. They owe us big time. Yeah.
That's our congressman. One more round of applause for the congressman.
Col.Greg Collins. Interesting aside that I hope he talks about is that he also has a connection to Bill Miles. Colonel Collins, and any of you who are not military, I used to work at Walter Reed. I was not in the military, but I worked there. Becoming a colonel is not easy. It's a lot of hard work, and he may not want to talk about that, but I'm going to tell any of you who might not know, it's a climb. Colonel Collins has spent most of his life with the New York Guard at the historic 369th Armory. He came to the Army in 1978 when he was 14. He was the commander and officer in the Guard. He founded the cadet program, the Harlem Youth Marines, in 1982 as a way to save young men and women from the danger of the street by using structure, discipline, and love to teach valuable life lessons and offer a much-needed sense of family. Colonel Collins, your comments.
Thank you. I started out as a young cadet in a program that was founded in the 1950s and 60s. Some of you might remember the Hire You and Act. Okay. Well, that was the 7th Avenue New Hamilton project then, where they had the 2,000 associates on there now. Well, that's why I started out as a young cadet. And when that was the project that the program closed down, we went to the Armory, and I've been there ever since. I grew up in the Armory, and at 16, I founded the Harlem Youth Marines Incorporated. I wanted to change the face of what cadet was all about, because when I was a young cadet, they did not teach us the history of blacks serving in the military. So I'm here today to tell you that I'm changing that. We're going to do something about that, because our children do not know our history about 369, our Hellfighters, Tuskegee Airmen, Triple Nickel, other black famous units, military units. I am looking to put a military academy school in Harlem, preserve the history of blacks in the military. The proposal already submitted to the Department of Education. We're working on that, we're getting close to it. I just got a phone call yesterday that we have a building in Harlem. I can't resolve it yet. I also had the opportunity to be the commandant of the first military academy school in the Department of Education. I took a middle school and turned it into a military academy called Renaissance Military Leadership Academy, IS-286, which is going to answer that now, 129th Street, I believe. African Power Complex. That's what the school did. That was budget cut also. So all the budget cut program going on for schools, Harlem Marine Cadet program is still going, and we're fighting to get this military academy school in Harlem. Some people might think it's unheard of, but our young men and women lacking structure, discipline, respect, sense of belonging, and this is what now, I'll tell you, growing up young in Harlem, wearing that military uniform, I walked down 105th Street, and someone would say to me, why are you wearing that uniform? Why are you fighting for the white man? Wait a minute, hold on, time out. First of all, I'm fighting for myself. Right, I'm doing something positive, and you're not going to do what I'm doing. So that was discouraging, but I had to think about all the greats who came before me that were African American, such as first black general of the Army, General Regiment Davis, Jr. Senior. Sorry, Jr. was in Tuskegee Airman. So these are the things that we're concerned. There's some things going on with the Army right now. Most of this history, and we sort of did. I had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Miles, the filmmaker of The Men of Bronze, and Mr. Miles worked out of my office in the Army. He was a 369 veteran. He served in the Army National Guard, and he was one of my mentors. I reached home one day in my office, it was hot July, August, and he nodded out, went to sleep. I called him 4 times, Mr. Miles. I ain't going yet. I said, okay. I'm scared of it. Okay. Moving on. We have some issues today intended to project our history. General Nathaniel James is the first black commanding general of the New York Army National Guard. He's a major general, retired now. He is now the president of the 369th Historical Society. The Army renovation is complete, the job is done, and the state, New York State Division of Military Naval Affairs, will not allow the 369th Historical Society, 369th Veterans Association, and the Harlem Marines back in the Army. Back in the Army. And this is like, I've been fighting this for the longest now. I had the opportunity to go on a talk show here and now, that was aired on Sunday, with Sergeant Booker, and we talked about some of the issues in the Army. Prior to taping the show, the state got word that I was going on the show about the Army. So they gave me a phone call. Also, now they called me. They're trying to reach me. And they said, well, the problem with the Army is that it's not open to the public right now. Military troops are back in the building. The National Guard back in the building. They're all over the city. They're in armories, they're in Camp Smith, they're in Colorado armories, so now everybody's gathered back, and they're back in the armory. He said, but it's not open to women, children, and it's not open to the public. And he said, we found lead in the building. So I'm like, okay, well, years ago we had fire rangers, pistol rangers in the army. We used to fire bands, we used to run the shoot in the army. In the motor pool is where they keep the vehicles, the trucks, and that's where the fire rangers located in. So we're looking at the drill floor, which is now on top of the Harlem Children's Home. Wow. Okay, the big floor of the Harlem Children's Home. So they told me this, my first question was, and I asked this question, I said, okay, they told me there's lead in the building, no one's allowed in the building. Why hasn't Guard troops been exposed to this lead in the building? So that's one question we have. This is a bogus story. We don't believe anything they found being lead because they knew that the Rangers were there before. They cleaned up the armory already, got the inspections out there, and then I got everything out. There's 2 parts of the building. The building that went into renovation, the front part of the building on 5th Avenue, 142nd and 143rd Street. The back part of the building, the drill floor, which goes underground, and then get on top of the children's home. So that's where the fire rangers get underneath the floor. So there's no lead in front of the building. But still, all our history, the archives of the 369, dating back to World War I to this present date, is in a trailer out in Brooklyn. And they will not allow the Historical Society to bring it back to the armory, and they won't allow veterans back in the armory. This is unheard of. So I'm fighting to bring it back to the armory, and I really believe we get involved in our history. And this is one of the reasons why get the word out to the Armory. So General James right now is waiting to at least get the trail back to Fifth Avenue and get it back to the Armory, but I'm trying to get it back inside the Armory. And during my time in the Armory, from the Armory, we have a museum, we set up in the Armory, schools would come by to the exhibits that we had set up in the Armory and learn the history of the 369 Harlem Hellfighters and the other military units, the airmen, and so forth. So right now I have that opportunity. I'm still fighting with the troops, the Star Society, and the veterans back in the building. What I have arranged is allowed to have that meetings once a month in the Armory. And we're talking about restoring all the history that we have preserved that's in that trail back in the Armory. So I'm going to need the help of the community pretty soon to get a petition signed, write letters to the governor, and that sort of thing. I also got Mayor Higgins, he's involved, wrote up to the governor, some letters about the different people, but right now it's on deaf ears as far as the answers. What are we going to do about that?
Okay, my first suggestion is we line up every black elected official that represents Harlem and the surrounding neighborhoods to form your team to fight the Navy to get you back in. That's my first suggestion. Okay. And then we get the general public on board.
Round of applause to the panelists, please. There's about 4 or 5 of them, and they're kind of little. Okay, first, I guess this may be one of the historians. What city in France is the grave site of the 369th veterans? What city in France has the grave site of the 369th veterans? So I'm not sure if that's something
I'm not going to be able to answer that question, but I can contribute this, that it may well be that at that site now there are a number of academics, military historians, who are there honoring the significance of it. There is now a book being completed by a professor at Brandeis, African American, and it deals with the battle to have that installation built. So I'm sorry I can't well, I would say Google, because you will find that such a place exists. And that's why it's significant, especially in terms of the fact that our War Department in 1919 did not see fit to have us memorialize even more dramatically in Paris.
Yeah, and I think that's a theme that all of our panelists, I think the film has also shown, and is really the reason for societies like Harlem Cultural Archives, because if we don't get the history right and we don't promote it, then somebody else tells the story, and then the children just don't know. Okay. This is kind of a combined question. So the question is, one question is, what's happening, what happened, so what's happening in the military today? That's a kind of a big question. I'm not exactly sure how to refine that one. Another question is, as a result of their sacrifice, how have we as Black Americans benefited today? And anybody can take that. So one is, what's happening in the military today? Like I said, that's a pretty global, big question. It may not be easy to answer. The second one, as a result of their sacrifice, and their, I mean, the men in bronze, the Harlem Hellfighters, how have we as Black Americans benefited today?
I can answer the question in the military today. I can tell you that racism still exists in the military. We've come a long way, but it still exists. Pertaining to the 369th Hellfighters, the Armory, the National Guard unit, they went from a battalion strength to now a brigade, which means it's a larger unit now. So now it consists of a transportation battalion, a military police battalion, we have a medical corps, finance. It's a larger unit now, and that's one of the reasons why the Armory running construction, so they can make the rooms larger for the troops to accommodate the troops that's going to be in the building, as far as it being a brigade or battalion. That answer that question?
That's good. How have their sacrifices benefited us as African Americans today? Anyway.
Well, it's interesting because Dr. Lewis touched on this earlier. When they came back in 1919, that was just the prelude to what became the Red Summer of 1919. And it was called the Red Summer because there were race riots up and down this country. And what differentiated those race riots was the fact that black communities that had been previously terrorized by white people invading and destroying their properties and killing them decided they'd had enough. And because many of these men had come back and they still had weapons, there was blood flowing in the streets because they were using their guns to fight back. And so what you had, and Dr. Lewis can expand on it, was the rise and birth of the new Negro. I'm just kicking it off. I'll let Dr. Lewis pick up on it. Because what they did was they changed the entire dynamic for black people in this country. They just said, we have had it, we're not taking this anymore. I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of what happened after the Red Summer. If we fast forward just recently, I think maybe 2 weeks ago, there were apologies being rendered because of a book about a warrior in World War II who returned, and I reached for his name. The point is that in full uniform, he was returning to his home in the South on a bus, and he asked to get off the bus and relieve himself. That was considered to be presumptuous, and it resulted in this man being attacked, set upon, and his eyes gouged out. The inquest resulted in a decision that he had provoked disturbances and got what he deserved. A federal judge has just written, a South Carolina judge has just written a very fine book about that. The whole thing, the man, the context, the savagery of it, the reaction, the insufficient reactions. And so now there are in the newspapers apologies being rendered by various governors and mayors along the path of that man's trail to attack. Well, symbolically, I suppose it is significant. It would have been perhaps something that only would have been a news item a few years ago, if even then. I think that in the midst of the most racist moment in our history, presidentially authorized, the reaction, curiously, is that guilt, indignation across color lines is building. And we do seem to realize if ever we get through this bad patch we are in, we may find that dictatorship sweeps aside our established institutions. But if we get through this morass and this Gehenna, I think, although under Obama we were not headed for a post-racial time, we may be heading for a time of racial sanity and honesty. Sounds a bit too good.
Well put. Actually, one of the next questions was a little context for me to Red Summer, so I guess that is important. And this is probably going to be a Dr. Leverett Lewis question, but anybody can chime in. Okay, 135th Street has one thing that's very, very important, and one of Marcus Garvey's main offices, I think, might be where 40 West 135th Street is, between Lennox and 5th, right in this block. Now, one of the problems that I have, of course, is that if you were to ask somebody, let's say less than 25, give me 2 sentences about Marcus Garvey, they might not be able to do that. And that's on us. That's one of the reasons for the Harlem Cultural Society. Because if the children don't know, it's really not the children's fault. It's our fault. And some people do not think that the public school system is doing an adequate job. Anyway, question for Dr. Lewis, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, if you didn't know, Dr. Lewis is probably the world's foremost expert on Dr. Du Bois. This is a Du Bois-Garvey question. Was there a difference between Du Bois and Garvey, their positions regarding African American potential to participate in World War I?
That's a broad question, isn't it? And I think Garvey regarded our participation in the war as a mistake because we were helping a white problem, and it was not in our advantage to spill our treasure and lives in that war. Du Bois, who should have had perhaps the same point of view, and in fact earlier did as he was a socialist, decided in a rather complicated evolution of thought that we had to be participants in this war. I suppose you might vulgarly say he believed that through the spending of our lives we might advance our citizenship, prove our merit, that sort of thing. Du Bois later will have regretted his part in the politics of our participation. You remember that he wrote a fabulously poignant editorial, and we must fight, we shall fight, and when we're after it's over, we'll have succeeded in our goals. By 1930, he thought perhaps the goals hadn't been achieved, and the purpose of the war and our participation was too complicated to say that by going off and fighting, you're going to produce social change. I'm not sure where Garvey was by that time. However, curiously enough, Garvey said something quite interesting about his philosophy. He said, I came and I had a kind of paradigm for our people. Separate equality, we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps, we have our own businesses, that sort of thing. But he also said, as he was on his way to jail in Atlanta, in federal penitentiary, he said, Mussolini stole my stuff. And I read that to mean that the kind of fascist organization so successfully invented by Mussolini and presided over was something he did admire. And the problem with that is that when you have a system that gets the trains to run on time, the trains tend to run over civil rights. And I think one would question whether or not Garvey's point of view wasn't so inherently nationalistic that it had serious inherent problems. But I commend the questioner to read the collected works of Garvey that Robert Hill so enterprisingly accomplished, and maybe read David Lewis's second volume, which wrestles with the similarities, differences, and what-ifs of the relationship between Du Bois and Garvey.
There's a film that looked for me in a whirlwind. I'm drawing a blank on the filmmaker who was a friend of mine. One of these senior moments. It's Jill, what you call his brother. Stanley's film, Look for Me in a Whirlwind. And Stanley sort black establishment views at the time that Garvey was advocating for our own self-employment, our own entrepreneurial spirit, the whole bit. There was indeed some conflict going on. It's worth digging into the literature and checking the film out.
Okay, that's it for the questions. One point that I want to make in regard to one of the sacrifice and benefits. We also used to be Boy Scouts in this building, Ken and Glenn and myself, and Mr. Dudley Glass was our scout leader. Mr. Dudley Glass never let us know two things. One, he was the second highest ranking African American in the fire department. While he was in the fire department, for the first 3 years in the fire department, he said, Jackie Robinson saved my life. I said, Mr. Glass, what are you talking about? He said, because they wouldn't talk to him for 3 years. Go to work, just grunt at him, point, don't talk to him. And he said, every time Jackie Robinson had a good day, a good game, he just lifted him up and carried him forward. Anyway, Mr. Glass later on told us he was a Tuskegee Airman. And we didn't know that either. He just kept all this kind of stuff quiet. So, a lot of this question about how did it benefit us, sometimes the sacrifice came in many small ways. Not always like big and well known, but just service. So people like yourself, people who have been in the military, have just taken on themselves to start small projects with 10 young people and do something. Those kind of things have been good.
Let me say something about being in this building and this particular school, because when we did Then I'll Be Free to Travel Home, we traced the historical arc of who we are as people fighting for freedom and full first-class citizenship in this country. And there are a number of names that come up. You'll hear names like John Rushmore, David Ruggles, Elizabeth Jennings. And I could say that to any number of grammar school kids in any school in New York, and they would just draw a blank. Even the kids that probably go to this school today. John Rushmore and his partner, who I'm drawing at senior moment, they founded the first black newspaper in this country, Freedom's Journal. And Freedom's Journal was the Bible for black people in this country, to find out where we were, what was happening, what our struggle was all about, how far we had come, and how far we still had to go. This is like 1828 or something like that. David Ruggles was the guy who founded the Vigilance Committee for whatever, I forget the full name of it, but the Vigilance Committee basically was a group of people who physically made sure that black murderers could not successfully snatch black people off the streets and take them across the river to New Jersey, which was still a slave state, or take them south to plantations. They physically confronted black murderers. That was the role of the Vigilance Committee. David Ruggles was one of the founders and the secretary. And they would document how many people they would save from slavery and how many people, one of the people they ferried through was Frederick Douglass. There are Elizabeth Jennings, and because women were just as powerful in this whole struggle as men. You know Rosa Parks, you don't know Elizabeth Jennings. Right here in New York City, Elizabeth Jennings got tossed off a streetcar twice because they didn't want black people on streetcars. And she said, I'm on my way to teach my Sunday school and you're not throwing me off the streetcar. And she fought them, ended up getting arrested. Guess who her defense attorney was? None other than Chester A. Arthur, a future president of the United States of America. So the interesting thing about black presence in North American society is we have been the driving force that moves the needle to make this country a true democracy, but it wasn't founded as a democracy, and it's still trying to become one. But John Rushmore, thank you for Freedom Journal.
can't thank you gentlemen enough for taking time on a Saturday. Ken, once again. Hopefully you accomplished what my good friend Dr. Russell Brown said when you have a panel of experts and authorities. I hope we learned something today. Okay? And as I said, I hope we don't fall into the historical amnesia that is plaguing this country. Okay? So I thank you all for coming out. If you come out, you'll be right. We have some refreshments for you. Please help yourself. If you need my card, I can give you my card as information on our website and my email address. I'll give you my phone number.